Today I'm going to show you how to build a couple of folding Kentucky stick chairs that I made for my cabin. Also called Tamarack chairs, they look great on any deck, porch, patio, or poolside campsite too. These can sell for $200 to up to more than $600 online, but you can build one for a fraction of that. All you need is a few 2x4s, some basic tools, and a couple of weekends. Be sure to stick around to the end of this video because we're going to put these chairs to the test and answer the most important question. Will it hold a fat guy? Hi, I'm Neil, and I'm sitting here in a 110 square foot tiny cabin that I'm still working on. If you don't know the story, here's the quick version. We had a barn fire. The good news is we had insurance. So if you guys showed up and put together a new barn for us in just one day, and I saw that and I said to myself, oh, hell, I could do that. And after 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days of planning, scavenging materials, and framing the walls in my garage, I built this little A-frame cabin. Check out my other videos for more on that. Over time, I'm planning to complete a self-sufficient, off-grid backyard homestead. So if you're interested in tiny cabins, building things, self-sufficiency, compost toilets, and the like, then you're in the right place. Be sure to subscribe. This video focuses on making some chairs for that cabin. I chose a traditional Kentucky stick chair design for really 4 reasons. One, I like the shape and how it complements the angles of the cabin itself. Number 2, I need to maximize the use of space. Folding furniture helps with that. And number 3, I have ancestral roots in northeastern Kentucky. Here's a picture of my great-great-great-grandparents, William and Elizabeth Morgan, sometime in the late 1800s with their kids, including my great-great-grandmother. So that's kind of a nice personal connection for me. And number 4, these chairs are surprisingly comfortable and sturdy. This video has all the details you need to complete this project, but I find it a lot easier having a printout with all the measurements and instructions. So I put a link in the description where you can buy an instant download of exactly the same plans that I used. Okay, let's start with materials. You'll need 3 8-foot long 2x4s. There are 6 here because I'm building 2 chairs. In addition to the lumber, you'll need 4 3-foot lengths of 1/4-inch threaded rod, also called all thread, 8 1/4-inch washers, and 8 1/4-inch nuts. When it comes to tools, you'll need 2 different power saws. In theory, you could do it all with a handsaw, but that would be ill-advised. I recommend a table saw, even though you could use a less expensive handheld circular saw. A small cheap one like this is good enough for the job. They're both essentially the same tool. With a table saw, you're pushing the wood across the blade. With a circular saw, you're pushing the blade across the wood. You'll also need a miter saw or chop saw. Again, you could get away with using a hand saw or circular saw, but I recommend a miter saw to make your life easier. The other tools you'll need are a power drill of some sort with a 3/8-inch drill bit. I recommend a benchtop drill press, but you could get away with using a handheld power drill. You'll also need some measuring tools. A measuring tape and ruler will work. A 7/16-inch combination wrench. A small adjustable wrench, maybe. It's good to have on hand, but you might not actually need it. A hacksaw and a hammer. Here again, you might not need it, but you never know when something's going to need a little tap. And I'll show you how I used a router to round over all the edges, but that's optional. In the description and printable instructions, I put links to where you can buy all these tools online. If you do use those links to build your tool collection, it helps me out too. Finally, the finishing supplies you'll need include a quart of stain in a color of your choice. You'll also want to seal the wood with a urethane varnish. A couple of 1 or 2-inch paintbrushes for both the stain and the varnish. Not shown here is some sandpaper or sanding sponges. You'll need at least some finer 100 and 220 grit sheets, and maybe some rougher 80 grit sheets too. If you get nothing else out of this video, I want you to know that you don't necessarily need top-of-the-line tools, especially if you're just starting out. If you can afford the best, good for you. But any tool that you can afford to buy today is 1,000 times better than nothing at all. Don't let the purists tell you otherwise. Remember, the greatness flows from you, not the tools. So there's 3 basic steps to building a Kentucky stick chair. I spread it out over 4 weekends, but you could probably do it in 1 or 2. Number 1 is fabricate or cut all the parts. Number 2 is finish the parts, sanding, staining, varnishing. And number 3 is assembling the parts. Step 1. Make the parts. The first thing you need to do is cut the 8-foot long 2x4s in thirds lengthwise. When you're doing your measurements, make sure you account for the width of your saw blade, which is roughly between 1/16 and 1/8 of an inch. This guide jig I found at a thrift store, a roller stand, and my 11-year-old son helped guide the long boards through the table saw. I think this is the hardest part of the whole project. Once you get this out of the way, the rest is relatively easy. I used a crappy old benchtop table saw I picked up more than 10 years ago. You can almost always find a used one cheap. This one almost gave out on me before it was through, but it got the job done. I'll probably need to replace it soon, but I've gotten way more value out of it than the $75 it cost me, so that's okay. As I said earlier, if you don't have a table saw, you could do this part with a handheld circular saw. If you choose to go that route, there's a link in the comments to a miter saw and circular saw bundle that looked like a good deal to me. Don't fret if the pieces are not all precisely the same width. We're not making high precision machinery here. It's a stick chair. Try to get it as close to 1/3 as you can, but it can vary a bit. You could use a thickness planer to make them all exactly the same width, but I don't have one, so I'm not going to do that. The nice thing about handmade furniture is that you can tell it was made by a human being. Minor imperfections, that's what makes it special. If you ask me, it's better than something that's machine made. Once you've cut all 3 2x4s lengthwise, you'll have 9 8-foot long sticks. Since I'm making 2 chairs, I have 18 of them. Each chair is made of 31 parts. Using a miter saw, the next step is to cut your 8-foot long sticks down to 6 different lengths according to this diagram. Those letter designations are not super important right now, but you'll need them for final assembly. Here's where you'll need the tape measure and a ruler to mark your cuts. For the shorter A pieces, it goes a little quicker if you clamp a stop block to the saw. That way you don't have to measure and mark all 11 of them individually. The miter saw I'm using here is close to 40 years old. I think it was my dad's before I snagged it. If you don't already have a miter saw, just go ahead and buy one that you can afford. You can always find a used one on the cheap. Replacing the blade isn't hard and usually makes it cut like new. It's one of those tools you're going to use on almost every woodworking project. Each of the 31 parts needs 2 3/8 inch holes, so the next step is to measure and mark the location of each hole according to this diagram. All the holes should be made through the broader side. That's the side that's closest to 1.5 inches. Pause here and take a screenshot, or go ahead and get the printable plans at this here link. It's important to get these measurements right. Note that all of the measurements should be made from the same end of each stick except for those short A pieces. Those should be measured from each end. Kind of funny that it's the A-holes you gotta watch out for. I'll be honest with you, measuring and marking the placement of all 62 holes is the most boring part of the whole project. That's 124 for 2 chairs if you're keeping count. Take it as an opportunity to chillax, listen to some music or your favorite podcast. After you've marked the placement of all the holes, it's time to drill them using a 3/8 inch drill bit. A drill press helps you keep the holes nice and perpendicular. That's French for straight up and down. You could use a handheld power drill instead, but the holes probably won't be perfectly straight. Just do the best you can. Again, this isn't high precision aerospace manufacturing. It's a stick chair. Most fitment problems can be corrected with some sandpaper and a file. If you're having any brilliant thoughts about drilling 2 or 3 holes at a time by stacking them, just don't. Things shift around and it usually doesn't work out right. If you must, then don't drill more than 2 pieces together at a time. Maybe you can hold them together with masking tape or something, but that can end up being more work than just drilling them individually. After you get all the holes drilled, it's a good time to loose fit the chair together, according to the assembly instructions coming up. At this point, it's a lot easier to correct a mistake or redo something than after you've gone through the trouble of staining and finishing. Step 2. Finish the parts. I used this cheap router and router table combo with a 1/4 inch round over bit to soften all the hard edges and corners. Instead, you could use 80 grit sandpaper or a sanding sponge to take the sharp edges off. You decide how much is enough. A router is a nice to have, but it's not absolutely necessary. The round over bit just does everything a lot faster and it's a lot more consistent and even than sandpaper. Just like a table saw, a miter saw, and a drill press, a router is another useful tool for your collection that comes in handy on a variety of projects. I'm still using the cheapest one I could find more than 10 years ago. Again, you don't absolutely need it for this project, but I'll put a link in the description anyway. After sanding or routing all the edges, you might want to stain all the parts a color of your choice. If you chose to go with cedar wood instead of pine, you could skip staining and varnishing because cedar is naturally weather resistant. It will eventually get a gray, weathered look after it's been left outside for a season or two, but it should last a long time, even if you leave it bare naked. If you decided to go with pine, then you'll definitely want to use a good exterior UV-resistant deck stain that won't fade as quickly in the sun. Even though I went with cedar, I used a stain to match the trim on my cabin. I like this oil-based Cabot Australian timber oil because it brings out the wood grain, unlike some exterior stains that just cover almost like paint. Whatever stain you choose, just read and follow the directions on the can. After staining, a couple of coats of poly varnish adds extra protection and a nice sheen that will give it a finished, professional quality. For exterior applications, I use this Helmsman spar urethane, which was created for ships and boats. It expands and contracts with the wood through changes in temperature and moisture. I prefer the satin finish over the high gloss, but that's a personal preference. Either one will do. As always, follow the directions on the side of the can. I should mention that the stain and varnish I used are both oil-based, so you'll need mineral spirits, turpentine, or some other thinner to clean your brushes. They make water-based alternatives you can clean up with soap and water, but those don't absorb into the wood and enhance the grain quite like oil-based products. So for me, it's worth the extra effort and the smell. Step 3. Assemble the parts. After all the effort you've put into making the parts, now is when it all comes together into an actual chair. Start by arranging the chair seat parts like so, according to this pattern. Again, take a screenshot or download the printable plans for reference. Then feed through 2 of the threaded rods, like so. Some will tell you to use a drill to slowly twist it through, but I find it easy enough to twist it back and forth with my fingers. If it gets tight, you can tap it through with a hammer. Next, arrange the backrest parts according to this pattern. Then feed a threaded rod through the holes along the top. Lay the backrest assembly on top of the chair seat assembly, lining up the only remaining holes on both that don't already have a threaded rod running through. Feed the 4th and final rod through the remaining holes, stitching or weaving the seat to the backrest. Finally, tighten the ends at the top of the backrest and at the front of the seat. Tightening the nuts on either end acts like a clamp, slowly drawing the open ends together. Note how the rods will bend as they come together. On this chair, I tightened the nuts from one side. On the second one, I alternated from one side to the other, which I think worked a little better. Here you can see how the width of the stick ends vary a bit from one to the next. That's okay. This design tolerates some variability like that. Next, cut the long ends of the threaded rods and file off any sharp burrs that will scratch and snag clothing. I also like to use this super glue stuff on the exposed shiny ends of the hardware. It's made for giving gunmetal a dark, corrosion-resistant finish. As soon as you brush it on, it instantly oxidizes the surface with a nice antique-looking patina. I think that looks a lot better. As a final touch, you can give the completed chair another coat of spar urethane. That's the same Helmsman stuff I brushed on earlier, only in a spray can. Finally, tighten all the nuts, but not too tight. Just enough so the chair feels good and solid. Now unfold it and plant your bum in the completed chair to test it out. So if you've seen my other videos, you know that I think everyone should have a side project going on. It's something that you find challenging and something you can't necessarily finish in one sitting. It helps distract you from the things in life that you can't control and focuses your attention on something that you can. It grounds you in reality. If your measurements are off and these chairs aren't put together right, no one's going to be sitting in a Kentucky stick chair that you built. And you're probably going to make mistakes, and that's normal. Be patient, take a break, figure out how you're going to fix it. If it were easy, everyone would be doing it. The world would be awash in Kentucky stick chairs, but it's not. So when it's done, you can show it off and die with the knowledge that you've brought something simple, good, and useful into this world that will probably outlive you. And if it's not perfect, so what? Just because it's not perfect doesn't mean it's not good. Believe me, building things makes life a little better for you and everyone else around you. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a big guy sitting here in a tiny house. Now, for the most important test of all. Will it hold a fat guy? Yes. Just a heads up though, you might hear some loudish creaking the first time you sit on it. That's normal. If it feels a little too tight, lighten the seat nuts a quarter turn until the folding action feels right to you.